today. Thanks very much, Bill. As you say, Labor has no tolerance for people who steal from workers, whether that be corrupt union officials stealing unions' money, stealing members' money, or whether that in fact be employers who underpay their staff. We want to make sure that workers are safe from such conduct, and that's why we are introducing further reforms to build upon the very significant reforms we put in place when last in government. In fact, just to recall, when last in government, the Labor government tripled the penalties for registered organisations, increased accountability and transparency for those organisations to ensure this conduct does not happen. But on top of that, today, Bill and I are announcing on behalf of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party further reforms. Firstly, there will be increasing the civil penalties for serious transgressions by officers of registered organisations. We don't want to see such actions occurring, such misconduct, such criminal behaviour in some circumstances, and for that reason we're going to introduce civil penalties that are akin to those penalties that apply to corporations. Secondly, we will introduce penalties, indeed increased penalties for auditors. We want to make sure that those people who are charged with the responsibility of independently examining the finances of registered organisations do so in a professional and accountable manner. And for that reason, we're going to ensure that there are greater penalties that would apply, including in the most extreme cases, imprisonment, if those auditors choose not to report malfeasance, criminal misconduct, and conduct similar to that. So we're going to ensure that it's far more likely that auditors are not in a position to be complicit in their silence, and that's a very important part of the regulation. I might add, is not something the government has considered doing, and I think it needs to be done. And further, in relation to auditing, we would look to rotate the auditors so that there is sufficient turnover to ensure that new parties are coming into such organisations to examine the books, which I again believe, as a result of that, would see greater scrutiny, a broader level of independence insofar as the oversight of such financing. Third, we would look to extend whistleblower protections to registered organisations, including unions, and the private sector. We will afford more protection to those whistleblowers, indeed encouraging them to speak out if there's been criminal misconduct or alleged criminal misconduct. Now, they'll have to, of course, report to regulatory agencies first, but they should be afforded greater protection. This is another way that we can ensure that our institutions in this country are indeed if not free from all criminal behaviour, there's a great likelihood that we'll see a reduction of such conduct. And again, a very important reform, something the government hasn't chosen to consider. As Bill said, we're looking to empower the current Commonwealth statutory agency, ASIC, which of course is the prime agency that examines the conduct of directors of corporations, and we're looking to broaden its powers in order for them to examine and investigate serious contraventions by registered organisations' officers. Of course, that includes unions. What that will do is provide more investigative teeth to the Commonwealth to examine the conduct and indeed to report on and respond to serious allegations that might be made. This is very important. The government goes on and has been on the record saying they want to see greater capacity to investigate and examine registered organisations. Well, this reform will mean that the same powers that apply to corporations would apply to unions, and I think that's a very important thing. And of course, I think it's important too, and Bill touched upon this, we need to see transparency in all elections conducted by the AEC. So for the first time, we will see a very high level of transparency of funding on union elections. That means that if indeed there is expenditure over the threshold amount, and we're proposing $1,000, then that needs to be disclosed. That will ensure that there is a great level of transparency. It will mean that whether you're a donor or receiver of such funds, you will be providing that information to the AEC. And again, of course, Labor is calling upon the Prime Minister to match Labor and reduce the disclosure threshold from $13,000 to $1,000. I mean, there's something here for the government too, and they have to respond to this. There are concerns that the threshold for federal elections is too high and it should come down, and it would be ludicrous for the obligations on unions and employer bodies be far, far greater than that for federal candidates in federal elections. So we think it's time now that the government match Labor in reducing the threshold down to $1,000. These are, as Bill said, very significant reforms. We're willing to sit down with the government to talk through these issues. We're certainly going to talk to the affected parties, and we'll talk to the crossbenchers, because we want to make sure, on top of the reforms that were introduced by Labor when last in government, we can build upon that, improve governance, and make sure that we have an effective and clean union movement. We know that's what Labor wants to see. We believe that the government's less interested in an effective union movement, but we believe that unions have a role to play in any democratic society. We just want to make sure that they do so with integrity and they do so effectively.